All right, very good. So welcome to the call. Today, we're going to talk about making the most of lists in SAM. And my name is Stephanie Zofyakina. I am the CEO and SAM lead for you today. So welcome. If you don't know me, you'll likely talk to me a lot in the future. So welcome. I'm here. And today what we're going to cover is kind of basics of list management. I want to get everybody on the same page. So just like how do you access a list? What are lists for? Types of lists, things like that we'll cover. We're going to talk about best practices for lists. And then there will certainly be some fancy tricks that you may not know about that we'll cover towards the end. So the purpose of lists generally are to kind of categorize your information, right? So common lists that you'll see in the system will be your program list, you will see stage lists, status lists, but you might also see lists used as race or age ranges, things like that. You can come up with lots of different lists in the system. There are by default hundreds of lists, and that can be extrapolated on. So again, I'm going to get everybody really on the same page with understanding lists. So some of the things that we're going to talk about is basically just how to actually access a list. Then the different types of lists that you'll see in the system. There are single value lists that allow a user to only select one option from the available options to select from. There are a couple different types of those lists, and then there is the multi-value list, which is only one type, which is a checkbox list. I'm going to go over some of the list functions, again, just getting everybody, so this can be used for basic or for advanced folks. How to edit lists. I will eventually talk to you about merging lists, modifying filters, and enabling and disabling some different list items. And then just to let you know, SAM admins are the only people that are available to access the list editing function. And that's really, it's actually very purposeful. It's nice to have a little bit of a hierarchy to who can manage lists, because sometimes we end up with way too many list items, or people overwrite things that may or may not have been important to other folks. So having a SAM admin and a lead to who is going to administer your site is very important for managing lists. So let's go ahead and jump into SAM so I can show you some of those basic things. All right, so lists can be found, like I said, throughout the system. A list is typically, again, it is a category, so you'll see them a couple different places, but as far as how to edit lists, the best way that I like to tell people to edit lists these days are through the field properties screen. So when you click on a field, any field in the system, you can see there's, this is from a view form, but you will see this view field properties link here. I'm going to go in and click that here. I'm going to take one step back, because now my system is participating with me, is also the field title here is another way to access that field property screen. So actually in this view of the field, you have two ways to access the same screen. As far as managing the list, the field properties screen, when it is a list, when the field type is described as a list, either a radio button list or a drop-down list, or even a big search list, you are taken to, you can see which list the field is utilizing. Okay, and so here, this is a link as well, and this will allow you to actually access the options that are available in that list. I'm going to jump out of here real quick, because I've said a couple of terms which I may or may not have described. And I do want to talk, before I talk about actually editing the list, is other ways to just access that. If you are on an edit form and you see list, oftentimes there is an edit link next to. Again, this is only going to be for SAM admins, but it will be to the right of the list. So I can click here and I'll be taken directly to the list in like a pop-up box that I can start to manage adding or editing the list items. The other way to access a list is through settings. This is probably going to be less utilized than others, but you do have the ability to click settings and then list. And this is a list of hundreds of lists in the system. So it is, like I said, a list of lists. There are a lot of lists. So an easy way is to Control F to start finding the list. I would really only recommend using this option if you know what list you're looking for. So you're looking for a race list or a case program list, something pretty specific and something that you're actively engaged in editing, go here. Otherwise, find the list on the forms that you're utilizing and either, again, click Edit next to it or access the field properties screen. Now, I'm noticing something you may or may not know is on an edit form, it's more challenging to access the field properties screen. So you'll come to a view form or a report and you can click here and access this. And actually, let's do a different list, like a case stage list. Okay, so I'm going to get in here and jump into the actual list that we're using. Yeah, so let's talk here about some of the basic things that you can do as far as managing this list. So you can add list items. And we might have, I'm going to add something to this list. Oops. And we actually have two of pretty much the same item here, okay? But you can add items to a list. So you can add any number of items to a list. Each list item can be edited. So maybe I don't want to call this inquiry and I now want to call it intake. If you have any records that have inquiry chosen as the value, it will now say intake if you do something like that. The other basic management options that you have are, one, you could set a default list item. So if 90% of your programs are domestic infant or are the same, or you're doing just home study only primarily, you might want to have a default list item selected. And so you can set it as default. In this case, application is currently set as default, which is maybe the first in this setup is like the first stage that a family typically will be in when they're entered into SAM. And so by default, we're going to label them as applications. So it kind of aids your team in data entry. But I can unset it as default and set something else as default. That is an option for me. The other thing that I want to talk about right here is enabling and disabling list items and deleting list items. So enable, disable allows you to now hide an option that was previously visible. Okay. What this does is literally just removes that from the list for users' visibility, but it maintains for all the records that list value. And once it becomes disabled, you can re-enable it. If you're in the early stages of creating your site or setting up your site, or if you just decide, I just never, and I'm not really super interested in this value anymore, you can delete items. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the withdrawn because we actually already have it with a similar record with withdraw as an option here. And if I delete it, it is now gone. It was as though, in this case, because I just added it, it's as though it was never there. There is a list modification history which people can utilize, and that'll give you all of the different changes that have been made to that list. And so that is another tool that you can use. Let's go back now, or rather move forward and look at the different list types. So this is a survey that I'm going to eventually send out to you guys. And it's going to show me almost all the different list types in here because I want the selection for survey items to actually be pretty easy for you to do. So this is an example of a drop-down list. I can only select one value from this list. I can't choose multiple, right? The next item here is a radio button list. Same concept that I can only choose one value, but I can, it's displayed to me in a different fashion. And then this is an example of a checkbox list. And here in checkbox list, I can actually choose multiple items. There's one other list type, but it doesn't apply on this survey. And so I'm going to go and show it to you inside the system again. I'm going to jump back inside the system. And the final option for a display of a list would be the big search list. So, and there's really, the big search list. And so this allows you to connect to a really lengthy list that can be searched. So diagnoses would be an example of a list that you might want a really lengthy value. If there are a lot of counties in your state, you might want people to be able to type that up. Countries, right? Things where there are, let's say, over 100 items in that list, it might make sense for users to start typing in order to search. It's also great, and of course, this is a drop-down list. Let's see if this one is. Oops, jump back. Drop-down list. There's my big search list. Over here to a birth mother and find. Here we go. So the big search list is primarily used in SAM for connection to a person or an organization record. It is typically linking you or linking this record rather to another record in the database, where in the example of persons, you could have thousands and thousands of person records in the system or thousands of organization records, and this allows me to search. So I could look for, let's look for another Zasyatkin. There will definitely be someone else here, and I could change the value. Okay. Big search lists that are connected to other entity types in the system do allow you to link them directly to that record. And I think that is it that I'm going to do for here. So let me jump out of here and come back to my slide deck here to keep me organized. So the next thing I'll talk about is best practices as far as when you're setting up lists. So what lists should be, what lists should not be. Lists should be common values where a text box isn't going to work. So if you start to find a text box that has similar spellings, but the intent of the values in that text box are the same, a list will probably come into play. Sometimes I think about like a referral source list. By default in SAM, we've got this list set up as a list so that there are specific selections that you can choose from. And it kind of just helps, again, categorize the main group. And then you can have an other text box for further descriptions that I saw it in this particular ad, but it was an ad that I saw your name in, or was a pregnancy resource center. And here is the resource center that you actually learned about the organization from. On the, when you're administering the database, if you find a text box list that should actually become a list, that text box can be converted. So you can change field types, and text to list will make each of the values in that text box become list items. The next item down here is that list items should be clear to your team. So something when I'm on calls talking about configuration changes and how to set up the system, a lot of times there's heavy discussion in what something means. So finding a clear parameter for that list item is important, and then certainly not only putting that information potentially into SAM in the field setup memo, but also communicating that to the team and making it clear that this is the parameter is going to be really helpful as you move forward. Most of your list should have around 5 to 13 items. So there's this excellent TED Talks that we're regularly reference is about using the how to make toast as a method for how to communicate really complex ideas. And 5 to 13 process steps is the number of steps that most people would describe when they describe of how do you make toast. Even though there's tons of variations on how people make toast, the statistician determined that 5 and 13 was a clear number. Same thing would go for lists. So some lists are certainly going to have many, many items like counties or states. We've got 50 states, right? They'll have a lot of items, but there are some, but if you can contain them, process lists, status lists, I think that you'll have a better time of understanding your lists as you're looking across programs or as your programs develop. If it is a status list, my suggestion is to make those status lists line up with specific action dates. And that is just, again, another way to kind of set the parameter. So an intake status means that the intake date is entered into the database. We've received some information from this client, but we've yet to receive their application. They've not moved into the next stage, right? So there is a start and an end point to that status. What list should not be are an excessive number of items, right? So that kind of goes back to that discussion of the 5 to 13. Exceptions would be diagnoses, counties, states, countries, people, right? There's potentially hundreds of staff that you have in your organization, and that may be a completely applicable list. I have seen before duplication between two separate lists, duplication of the list items that are within that list, and that's going to make it really confusing or pretty much redundant information. I've seen it a lot with the program list and with the status list. So just check. Program is like obviously what program are they in, and the stage or the status list is where are they within that program. And they don't really, one is, the status is really a subset of the program. You can certainly also have duplication on the same list. So be mindful of that. It makes sense to check on your list periodically and kind of do a review. Just like you would clean out your closet or anything else, it's kind of taking inventory of what's going on here. End of the year reports, budgeting reports, kind of planning those reports that you're pulling out of SAM for that will be good indicators of statuses that, because typically you're going to have those status fields on those type of lists because that'll help aggregate the information and that will help you kind of do a review. So it doesn't have to be a whole separate day that you're reviewing everything. It's kind of when you're looking at the end of the year at things. And oh, I'm going to totally forget. I think her name is Maria Kondo, I think, the woman that's got the magic art of tidying up, right? She's got, if she is who I always think about with this, but certainly if a list is unhelpful and you are not utilizing it, let it go. It is okay to do that, and you can disable a field. For me, always field and Sam. Oh, right. And so let's look at tips and tricks as far as some of the fun and kind of things that you might not know about lists, but things that you can do. On checkbox lists, you might have an item that is an other, right? And so there is the ability for Sam to make a connection between the checkbox list item and the other text box list that will allow any value to be entered in it, and to combine them so that on view forms, on reports, on templates, you only need to utilize a single field, the checkbox list. You don't actually need to also include the other field, because that other field will be added as one of the values that are given to that, that record. So let me jump in and kind of show you what I'm talking about with this. I've got a list called birth mother circumstances. And so right here, I've got my checkbox list items, right? If I click here, I can see all the different things that have been selected here. And one of them is other. And then I've got this text box list, which is anything goes in here, okay? If I access this list, and I'm going to click the field properties screen. When I access the list here, oh, sorry, wrong one. I'm going to go using this list. Under advanced options, right down here, I can, where's that option? Oops. Oh, you know what? It's back. Go back. Pause. Let me go back. Okay, so when I open this here, I'm on the field, and under the field, under advanced options, there is link other text box field to this checkbox list. And this will allow me to select the birth mother circumstances other field and connect it. Okay, so now it's connected, I believe. Once that is done, Sam will show you linked fields. So it's telling you how it's linked. This is an edit link. I can get over here to this, and I believe here on edit, I could change that field. But back on my record, now my sickness value that I've added here is add is included here. So then on my form, I could actually hide this field off of it and not need to see it. What that means is that other text box field needs to be on an edit form where you're kind of editing this information in bulk. And then when you go to display the information, you can see it here. Like I said, this is shown for on fields and on reports, or on forms and on reports. You'll be able to see that kind of information combined together. Let's see. Oops, need that. The other thing that I want to show you is merging list items. So where you have two or more similar list items, they're going to now become one. So the value of merging from item is going to be replaced with the merge to, and that's kind of difficult to understand until we see it in action. So I'll show you that in a second. And then you're going to end up with a greater count of records and they are all going to be the merge to value. Ooh. So what is my, option. Didn't let me go back to Sam, so I'm going to go right back in here. And my merge was the case stage on the family. So let me jump over here. So Jeff and Emma here, their case stage. I've got this list, and I've got application approved, and I've got home study. And I'm going to suggest at this point that application approved is more of a milestone in potentially the application process, but it transitions us right into the home study. So I'm not actually going to have a status of application approved. So I'm going to go and show you the merge for this. So I'm now going to get to the list, and I'm going to advanced items, and under here I'm going to merge list items. So I'm going to merge from application approved into home study. I'm going to take one step back and get right back to the same spot, is to show you down here in my field values, I've got 4 records that have application approved, and I've got 9 records that have home study. So once I actually make this merge happen, I'm going to end up with 13 home study records and 0 application approved, and application approved is no longer going to be in my list. So back here on my merge list items, I'm going to press save. Sam's going to ask you to confirm it's merging from application to merging to home study. Confirm that again. Now in my list, application approved is no longer here. And if I refresh this list, where am I? My home study says 13. Okay. On my form, I will need to refresh. And if I look, sorry, at my case stage, I no longer, they love that, frog in your throat. Oh my gosh. Okay, I think you can hear me again. Kind of can't talk really well. They love that. But the option is now gone for application approved. All right, let's jump back here. The other thing to do is to automate lists. And so we're definitely running out of time. And I would not be able to talk to you very well with this voice. But going back to kind of the best practices is as you align your process and your action items, which are dates, with specific statuses, that will help you figure out where you want to put auto actions in order to save your team a lot of time with updating dual fields. And because they don't have to update two, there it comes back. Because they don't have to update 2 fields, it'll improve your data integrity altogether. So the very first thing to do is always kind of go back and define your process. One of the things with complex processes like adoption and foster care is there are a lot of processes. There are also a lot of things kind of happening simultaneously. Always important to just kind of break it down to one section at a time. Focus on that, let it feel good, do some testing, get it done. You'll set up auto actions, and then certainly, like I'm saying, go ahead and run that test. All right, good thing. Now that my voice is coming back, I'm closing out this webinar with what did we review? So one is just, again, how to access and edit. This is really going to be done by your SAM admins. You can access list through the field properties screen. And on the sidebar of the list is where you can make a lot of the edits. You will want to find the right list. So are you looking for a single value option or a multi-value option? Think about where users are entering it, and that'll determine what kind of field type that you choose to display this list. Same thing with the number of items in the list. Then define it. It's going to be super important to making sure, why is this list useful, defining parameters, and make sure to make that very clear with your team. You've got some fancy things like checkbox list other, so that you can display all the values without having multiple columns. Merging list items helps you clean up, and automating the lists for statuses particularly is really beneficial for your team to reduce data entry time and increase integrity. Thank you so much for joining me. Always have my water on me, but it was not supportive today. After the call, you're going to see an email come through, hopefully that will provide you a link to the webinar when this is done. You can always find our other webinars that we've recorded on the webinars link. And there's another webinar scheduled already for February. That's going to be Falling for Forms, and I'll talk about how to customize forms, things like that. If you have any questions about today's webinar or anything else in SAM in general, reach out to us at support@inreachsolutions.com. And I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.